Hey everybody, what's going on? Back again with another video. This video is going to be about the center. Okay, I just want to say briefly before I begin, Chess Audiobooks is on Instagram, also on Twitter, but more importantly, I'm playing on Live Chess or Lee Chess rather, and chess.com under the same name, Chess Audiobooks. So come and say hi to me. Let's play a few games, and let's just build up this community here. Please subscribe, hit that thumbs up button. That's the most important thing you can do to help support the channel. So just take a second, please hit that thumbs up button for me to allow this content to be seen by many more people. All right, this is a game from 1945. We're stepping into the time machine right now. We're going to Hollywood, California in 1945 with the black pieces up top. Great picture and photo of Reuben Fine, who was a very talented chess player. But he decided, as many chess players do, at a certain point, he wanted to pursue a professional career outside of the 64 squares, and he became a psychologist. But up until that time, he had like a winning score against some fantastic chess players. He was definitely one of the strongest players in America at the time, and even in the world in his heyday in the 40s and 50s. On the bottom there you have Herbert Seidman, who was a senior master. All right, so he never reached those great heights of legendary chess players like Frank Marshall, but he was a strong player. New York City resident, of course. Hated Bobby Fischer because of Fischer's anti-Semitic marks, but Seidman had the white pieces. And this game right here, I feel, is a great example, to use in explaining just different aspects of the center and the importance of whether occupation of the center is important. So we're going to talk about occupation of the center, mobility of the center, okay, the destruction of the center, and the maintenance of the center. So hopefully I can get those things across to you in this game right here. So let's get into it. So Herbert Seidman had the white pieces. Oh yeah, one more thing. This game took place in 1945, once again at the Pan American Tournament, and you can see the results of the tournament. Reuben Fine actually came in second in that particular tournament there. So yeah, like the strongest American chess players at the time, and Fine was second to Reshevsky. So e4, Fine played knight f6, Alekhine defense. I like using Alekhine defense as an example because it balances right away if white plays e5, right? If white is timid and plays, say, like knight c3, black can equalize immediately by just playing e5 himself, or if he wants to keep it in the obscure sidelines, he can play d5, and games can transpose to Scandinavians, or just rare sidelines of the Alekhine's defense itself. But e5 is really the only true test of this opening from black's perspective. Knight d5, d4, d6, and knight f3. Now we have what is known as the modern variation of the Alekhine's defense. Traditionally, you would see bishop g4 played here, which is playable, but has kind of like a slightly dubious reputation. So here you see Reuben Fine playing g6, which is known today as the Albert variation. Obviously, in 1945, Grandmaster Albert was probably in diapers, so it couldn't have been the Albert variation, but we know that it was Grandmaster Lev Albert who made this variation popular for black as a lifelong advocate in his chess career of the Alekhine's defense. But there it is. You see the Albert variation at this point in 1945. G6 was played, and C4. Another critical line is bishop C4, using the piece activity instead of just placing pawns in the center here. But C4 is viable also. Knight B6, and right here you can already see that White has built a formidable center, has taken space as he occupies the first 4 ranks of the board. Now, if things stayed like this, then Alakon's defense will be unplayable. White just has too much space at this point, and he would just cramp the black position and eventually win by an overwhelming assault. But black is constantly going to be threatening the piece of the white pawns in the center. You see, white wants to take the space and then create some stability there and just keep the status quo. If white could just keep it like this, he would love that. So it's up to black to constantly try to keep white off balance, create disruptions, and constantly attack the center. It's very important that when you allow your opponent to occupy the center with pawns, that you fight vigorously to attack that structure. All right? That's the only way you can justify your play, is by tearing down and harassing the structure. So you can already see here that black is trying to create enough pressure on the E5 pawn that he wants to provoke white into exchanging. Okay, and this is what happens. So E takes D6. This is one of the main lines, and black can take with the C pawn or E pawn. Here he takes with the C pawn, and so that was a small victory, very small victory for black, right? Because he's gotten white to exchange that spearhead on E5 because there's too much pressure. Eventually, black is gonna take on E5 and then perhaps trade the queens and stuff like that. So usually white will capture on D6. And so although black has achieved this small victory in getting rid of white's spearhead, you can see black still has problems to overcome. It's not finished there. Okay, you have these two beautiful pawns lined up on C4 and D4, and you can see I've highlighted the squares that they control and influence. All right, this is still a problem. White still has space advantage, and this is why white doesn't have a problem trading off on D6, because he still has a nice solid position, and black is still going to have to justify his play further on in the game by being able to do something about this. Again, if the position stays like this, this is great for white. He has more space in the position and control over the center. So black is still going to have to play vigorously. The battle isn't over. Game continue. Knight C3, bishop G7, bishop to E3, castles, bishop E2, bishop G4. So you can see that black is pressuring the center indirectly. Castles and knight C6. All right. And again, I've highlighted so you can see what black's strategy is clearly. So right here, black is already threatening moves like bishop takes F3, for example. And then after bishop takes F3, the pawn on C4 would be hanging. All right. And this is part of black's argument that, hey, you built up this center, but now you're going to have to take care of it, right? You have all of this territory. Now you're going to have to make sure that it's guarded correctly. So, of course, white doesn't want a situation where bishop takes on F3 and then the G pawn takes on F3, ruining the white pawn structure and weakening his king side. Okay? This is why white has tried several moves here. One of the most popular moves is B3, which was played during the game. Also popular is played from time to time is C5, but really doesn't lead to anything for white. So for instance, play could go D takes C5, D takes C5, and then after bishop takes C3, it's giving up the bishop for the knight, so that black can take over d5. This is fine for black. All right, getting rid of that dark square bishop. So now black doesn't have to worry about getting mated on the dark squares. This is a good position for black. And you can see the weakness here. Another idea that's more popular than that is d5. And now bishop takes f3. And you can see what we talked about before with this attack on the c pawn. So now g takes f3 happens, knight e5. Again, there's trouble in Hollywood. Okay? So just some quick examples of what could go wrong there. So b3, the move itself doesn't really add anything of substance, but white is trying to stabilize what he has already. Remember what I said, if white can just keep the position as it is, he'll have an advantage. He'll maintain a slight advantage, so that's what he's trying to do. So b3, although it's not a big time move like say like rook c1 or something like that, or queen d2, right, important development move, he's just stabilizing what he has already. Again, the onus is on black to prove that white's center is weak. Here, e5 is played. Another important idea is d5. Two different plans, but e5 was played during the game. Seidman played the move b5. Another popular idea is d takes e5, d takes e5, and you can see I have highlighted here this 3-2 majority on the queen side. This is very important because black has lost many an endgame due to this simple pawn structure here, this 3-2. So it's not to be underestimated at all. All right, but that's another idea. In the game, Seidman played d5, taking more space. All right, and now let the games begin. Knight e7, and again there's this threat of e4, and you can see the knight is unprotected on c3, and the rook on a1 is looking vulnerable there. So rook c1 protects the knight and gets the rook out of the way. Knight f5. Now I want to get into the next part of my discussion about the center. Mobility is very important. So you can see, although white has more space, right, with this pawn on d5, with these pawns, you know, from a2 to d5, they're not particularly mobile. Now you might ask, why do the pawns need to be mobile? The reason why they need to be mobile is because if given enough time, right, say they're not mobile, if given enough time, black will just organize his pieces in such a way to where he will attack and win these pawns, right? He will destroy the structure, right? It's in slang terms, it's like being a sitting duck, right? You don't want your pawns to be immobilized. It doesn't matter if they're central pawns or you have pawns on the queen side or king side. Mobility is very important. This gives us a great insight on one of the major lessons that we're often told about the center, and why it's good to have pawns in the center, right? Having pawns in the center is great because you can use these pawns to create a wedge in the position, a la King's Indian attack, when you move the pawn to e5, and you create that wedge which separates queen side from the king side, and you go and attack on the king side. It's also good to have pawns in the center because you can push those pawns and take away squares from the enemy pieces, right? For instance, when you push the pawn from e4 to e5 in Alakhan's defense, the knight has to move or he's lost. Okay? The third option, why it's good to have pawns in the center, is that you can open lines for your pieces, right? By exchanging at a certain point, you can, when it's convenient for you, can open lines. What do all three of those things have in common, right? Creating a wedge, driving your opponent's pieces away, and opening lines. All three of those things have in common? What they have in common is they all require mobility of the pawns. If the pawns are fixed or blockaded, none of those things can take place. That's why Nimzovich, in his book Blockader, and also in Blockade, and also in the system, he talks about blockade so much, because once you take the mobility away, it doesn't matter if a person occupies the center with pawns. If you take away the mobility, they're useless, and then they eventually become targets. So from here on out, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see white trying to be mobile, because of course white understands also, and you're going to see black trying to take away this mobility of these pawns on the queen side for white. So knight f5, why knight f5? Because with the bishop on e3, black wants to be white wants to be able to play c5 at some point, right? Which maybe with a little bit more preparation, maybe with a move like b3, then c5 to keep the pawns connected. But nevertheless, he wants to make this break on c5. So knight f5 is already threatening to take the bishop pair from white and also hinder that move c5. So white plays bishop g5, trying to gain the tempo on the queen. f6 is played. So, okay, the bishop on g7 is a little worse now, but black gains time, drives the bishop back. Bishop can't go to e3 because the knight will just capture. So bishop d2, and now queen e7. Notice how queen e7 fortifies the c5 square indirectly by backing up the d6 pawn, and it connects the rooks. All right, so black is keeping an eye on those pawns, because those pawns really can't become mobile at this point. Knight e4, same idea. The idea is to eventually be able to push this pawn to c5. Notice the rook on c1, knight on d4 to support. So what does black do? Not yet. Knight d7. Again, you're not going to be able to do it. Can't push. Bishop b4. There's a fight. White wants to be mobile. Black is like, nope. You see, because if you either want to be able, if you're black here, you want to be able to win these pawns outright, right? AKA destroy the center, or you need to fix the center and blockade it. Okay, so where it's useless, and you're able to basically just run around, work around those advanced pawns, right? Where they're just ineffective and weak, and eventually pick them up at some point if you can. So b6. So you can see Fine is doing a great idea. Fine is doing a great idea. Fine is doing great at blockading, stopping the pawns from moving. So the pawns are still there. So the pawns have been frustrated. Knight f d2. Bishop takes. Queen takes. Now let's play knight d4 first. So knight d4 hitting the queen. Queen e3. So now let me point out. Look at black's pawns on the king side. Okay, so black has a little more space on the king side of the board. But notice his pawns are more mobile than white's are on the queen side. You can already see that under the right circumstances, black can play f5. And it starts looking like a King's Indian defense or like a Dutch defense, right? The pawn structure. You can see under the right circumstance, black will play f5, f4, maybe even e4, or f5, e4, or f5, f4, g5. In other words, black has mobility of his pawns, right? That's the difference. White is trying to get it. Black has it right now. Let's keep going. So after queen e3, knight c5. So that's even adding more of like a seal on the position, to where those pawns on the queen side for white aren't going anywhere. Rook fe1, and now black starts moving. f5, knight takes c5, b takes c5. So this is a victory for black strategically. Why? Because the rook on c1 is null and void, and he's gaining time on the bishop. So that means that rook on c1 has to be moved somewhere else, maybe b1, and basically black has gained time here stifling white's pawns. So as you can see, if you look at, I know I went crazy with the graphics. If you look at this position, right, white's pawn structure in particular, the A2 to D5 pawn chain, we could look and say, yeah. Matter of fact, I'll go to the next move, Bishop C3. You can look at white's pawns and say, yeah, white has more space, right, on the queen side, right, spearheaded by the D5 pawn. But it's not effective because there's no mobility and it's blockaded. None of none of black's pieces are in danger or anything, or even need to use those squares, namely C6, E6, and B5. All right, so black has effectively worked around that. Okay, so this is what the arrows are highlighting, is that, yeah, white still controls those squares marked in yellow, but they're not effective. The pawns have been effectively neutralized. Meanwhile, look how the tides have turned. Look how much territory black has on white's fourth rank there, highlighted by the green arrows. All right. Now, I have highlighted in red the knight because there's immediate threat on board. So after bishop c3, white is threatening bishop takes d4, c takes d4, and then queen takes d4, followed by rook takes the queen on e7. So that's why I highlighted that, and that's why Fine played queen h4 to get the queen off the e file. All right, but look how the tides have turned and how the counterattack in the center has worked out for black. Right, we went from here, pardon me, go back a little bit. We went from here, right, where white had all the space and everything like that, all the way to here, where black had turned the tides around. Now, white still has some space because this is a give and take thing. You know, you can't just give the space up in the beginning and expect you to get 100% back in return. All right, but black has turned it around. Of course, if you're playing like a weak player, you can just destroy the center and you know, everything's all good. But you know, with two strong players, you're gonna have some give and take. All right, so yeah, white still has some space in the center, but we can say and agree that black's position is better here. Queen h4 happened, and I have the arrow highlighted on the b4 square. Why? Because white still is trying to mobilize his pawns. See, the whole game it's the same, you know, the same thing. White is trying to mobilize, black's trying to demobilize, and of course move his own pawns. So after this threat to his queen h4, b4 is played. Now, of course, white wants to play b takes c5, d takes c5, and have this nice pass pawn again, with this idea of, yes, now my pawns are mobile, they can go somewhere. Bishop h6, now the queen is hit. Queen d3, okay. e4, remember, black's pawns are mobile, hitting the queen. Queen g3, Seidman goes into this endgame, queen takes, h takes, and now the lesser of two evils, of course. Black doesn't want to allow b takes c5 and d takes c5, giving up a pass pawn on the d file. So lesser of two evils here. He just takes, c takes, and b takes. Now you can see white again is hopeful, right? Has this mobility. He wants to advance c5. Of course, the pawn on d6 is threatened immediately. However, there's some tactical problems because you can see that the bishop is on h6, attacking the knight on d2. So if bishop takes, then you're going to have, if bishop takes on d6, you're going to have bishop taking on d2. So the tactics have to be worked out. So rook a b8. Of course, Fine is threatening to capture the bishop with the rook. And the bishop has to humbly return because, like I said, if bishop d6, although he's attacking both rooks, bishop takes d2, wins a piece, and also attacks both rooks. So Seidman has to play bishop c3. He's attacking the knight, but again, not really, because the knight would be hanging on d2. At this point, Fine parts with his bishop. Bishop takes d2. Bishop takes d2, and of course, for tactical reasons, he does it. And rook b2. And now you can see the pawn on a2 is attacked. Now, again, take a moment, look at white's pawn structure on the queen side from the A to the D file. Notice that the B pawn is absent, but other than that, the structure has remained the same. This is what I'm talking about. Black wasn't able to outright destroy the white center, but he was able to fix it in place. So now it's just a sitting target. So that pawn has been on A2 forever. The pawn has been on C4 for a long time. And now, just due to the pressure of the black attack, now you see the A pawn is about to be won. The bishop on D2 is attacked. So rook C D1. If bishop C3 is trying to get slick and attack the rook, the knight plays E2, which forces the loss of exchanges here. King F1, knight takes C1, bishop takes B2, knight comes back. All right, very strong. Let's say rook E2 and then rook B8. All right, and this is pretty much lost for white at this point. This is why the very passive rook CD1 was played, and just rook C8 now. Again, hitting the fixed pawn structure. See, once you stop them from moving, attack, attack, attack. Bishop F4. White is trying to stay alive. Again, he's still seeking that mobility, right? He wants to attack on D6 and have that passed pawn, right? He's still hoping. But rook takes C4. So now the structure starts to break down the center. The last vestiges of hope for the white pawn structure fading away. Bishop takes D6. So there it is. He has his passed pawn finally. But rook B5. Okay, so just for a moment, white had his passed pawn, but it's just like that. It's gone. Rook B1, of course. Now rook takes B1. You take that passed pawn out the way. Rook takes D5. Rook B8 check. King F7. Bishop goes to F4. And now just rook D7. And I want you to take time to look at this beautiful position by black, right? And think of how the game started with this nice pawn center by white, powerful pawn center and space. And now look, the tides have completely turned. It's black with the space, black with the dominance in the center, black with the mobile pawns, right? So even though that bishop is on F4 right there, there's no way that white can really stop the black pawns if they wanted to move, because you have you can play a move, for instance, King F6 followed by G5 at some point, and those pawns are very healthy and mobile on the queen side. But maybe black doesn't even need those pawns at this point. Game continue, rook A B1. So the only hope for white at this point is to try to become active. All right. Anytime you're up material, okay, they tell you want to try to, a lot of times trade down pieces. But the main principle underlying that is basically you want to diminish your opponent's possibility for activity. Okay, the only way white is gonna win this is by being active and catch white out there. So catch black out there. So black is just going to diminish the activity about trades. Knight E2 check, King F1, Knight takes F4, G takes F4. And you can see black even hinders his own pawns, right? He blockades his own pawns, but he's had such a dominating position at this point, he can afford to do that. Rook C2, Rook 1 to B7, which again is favorable to black to trade. But of course not right at this moment because of, he doesn't want to drop the A7 pawn. King E7, Rook D7, King B7, and now Rook H8. And this simple way to win from Fine here is to nurse this passed pawn. King E6, rook g7, king f6, and here comes the pawn. And so forces white to go passive. King e6, rook g7, rook b2. Again, there's nothing really that white can do. a2, and then Seidman resigned. The idea here is that I have highlighted. So the threat on board is oops. The threat on board is just simply rook to b1, right? Followed by the queen. Therefore, if the king tries to say go up to g1 or g2 or h2, then simply the e3 pawn will be played, and this pawn will be pinned. So for example, a2, king g2, e3. That's gonna win. Also, white can try to prolong things with rook a7 check, but then the king eventually is gonna hide himself behind this cluster of pawns here, and then you're gonna have the same situation because rook b1 check is always gonna be a threat. So eventually the king is gonna have to get out of that, and this is when e3 will be played. So fantastic game from Reuben Fine. Like I said, it's a clear illustration on, just playing in the center, dealing with the center, the different concerns of the center. And these principles can be taken into all the different openings. It's really not an opening, applies to a specific opening. I just like using Alakon's defense because of the imbalance created. Like you're just giving up the center, and therefore you can see this clear illustration of how black and white both deal with the center. The player that takes the center right from the beginning has a big responsibility to maintain that center. But it's not just about maintaining the center. As you saw in this game, you have to maintain a healthy center. A healthy center is a mobile center. You gotta make sure those pawns remain flexible. If you look at games, let me see if I can find this variation here where, let's see, e5. Let's go here to this variation, right? Like in a position like this, one of the reasons why white is able to do well in these type of positions is because of the mobility of those pawns. It's very hard to stop those pawns on the queen side. It's just a sample position, but you'll see many Alakon defense games where black will play e5 at some point. One is the Varen's variation, actually, where it looks kind of similar, where white will end up with this 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side, and it's very difficult for black to deal with it, right? It's a very strong line because those pawns on the queen side are mobile. It's hard to stop them. Black will try a5, but then white will have a3 at some point and then play b4, and those pawns never really get stopped. Okay, you can apply that same principle to the central pawns, the king side pawns. Remember, it's not just enough to have the pawns, right? Because if you have the pawns, but then they get immobilized, you'll see the same thing happen to those pawns that you saw in this game, right? The pawns were fixed, and eventually they just became targets. And you can see here at this point, the pawn structure looks like that of like an abandoned building, right? Once glorious, once new, but now is destroyed. And you can see, this game is a great illustration of that. So I hope you enjoyed that. Now, in the video here, please like and subscribe. Please hit that thumbs up button. That will help my videos go on in the algorithm. Check the links below. There's always books, DVDs related to the subject or the opening that you'll see on the board. So Alakon's defense, we're going to have some videos, DVDs related to the Alakon defense. And also, please consider supporting my channel through donation. But if you can't do anything, right, just hit that thumbs up button. It's free to make the mouse go over there and hit that thumbs up button, because that's very important, because I do believe it's good content and I want everybody to see these videos. So you can share them, whatever, but just hit that thumbs up button and let me know what you think in the comments below, okay? Or any games you might want me to comment on and discuss. And oh yes, by the way, I didn't discuss the map below. Yes, Hollywood, California is in the United States, right outside of Los Angeles. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and I will see you guys on the next one.